Thank you very much. Today I would like to talk more about design than algorithms. There's certainly an interesting algorithm story if we're talking machine learning algorithms, and I can answer some questions about that. That's not the focus. When we get into the area of conversational AI, there are some different technologies. There's the current technology that has some machine learning in it, but also has a human designer and engineer in the loop. And then there's the coming technology that's all algorithms. And so we're kind of they're not quite, they're not quite ready for prime time yet. And so in a way, I don't care so much about the underlying technology. I want to know, how do we design for either of those platforms? What do we need to do to design a conversation? So you got a little bit of background. I'll go quickly through this, but I've been working in Silicon Valley Research Labs for 20 years now. First down Page Mill Road at Xerox PARC, then at Yahoo Research. Actually, I was in Santa Clara, and now I'm down in San Jose at the IBM Research-Almaden Research Center. So I've been very fortunate to work at all these beautiful locations. As Martha said, so my PhD is in sociology. My focus in sociology is an area called ethnomethodology and conversation analysis, or you can just say one or the other. They're related. We study people at work, and we study conversation in the wild, naturally occurring conversation and work. And so I've studied people in work settings. I've studied, then since I've been at these technology labs, I've been trying to apply what we know as conversation analysts to technology. And so I've studied interaction in virtual worlds. I've studied interaction with search engines, and now I'm studying interactions with these new voice-based agents. Voice and text-based agents. For those, so just in terms of my background, conversation analysis, I don't know if anybody knows Harvey Sachs and Emmanuel Shegloff. If you do, then that kind of locates me in terms of discipline, but I won't go into detail on that. Okay, so today I'd like to talk about these things that are now proliferating. You might have an Amazon Alexa or a Google Home or an Apple, I think, HomePod, I can't remember what they call it, in your house that you talk to. We're all familiar with Siri. That's been on at least the iPhone owners' phones for a while. I don't know if there's anybody in the room who helped create Siri. Maybe there is. And there's also these other things we see, these chat bots, as they're often called, where you're using kind of a texting mobile interface, and it has some other things, right? So my main question is, how do we design the user experience for these new kinds of interactions, for these new kinds of platforms? Because they're very different from the older systems. And let me just pause for a second to go into presenter mode. Sorry, it'd be easier for me to read the slides. Okay. And so that's the question. So part of the user experience is, of course, you've got a device there. It's got a really interesting circular light at the top that gives you certain feedback. Or here you've got a familiar instant messaging kind of user interface where you enter text and stuff. But that's not the core of the user experience, right? The user experience is all about the exchange of utterances, the sequences of utterances in this, right? That's the core of this new kind of user experience. How do you design that? That's the focus of my work in about the last 5 years. So just to add one more thing, most of my career I've been studying people, humans speaking in natural settings. About 5 years ago, I started to learn how to build conversational or natural language-based agents, and so I've been bringing the two together. And of course, I'm trying to do it in a systematic way. Okay, just a quick thing to think about web design for a minute. If you look at web design, this is the IBM web page in 2016. You can argue, but I think it looks great, right? It's professionally designed, right? It's familiar to us. We know how these interaction methods work. There's a search box. There's a hamburger menu. It's called the hamburger menu in the corner, right? We're familiar with this kind of interface, and you can hire people to create this kind of interface. And web design is a mature discipline. But 20 years ago, the IBM website looked like that, right? What's the difference? There was no web design discipline at that time. This looks very much like it was created by an amateur, because of course it was, right? We were all amateurs then. I remember creating web pages in Netscape Navigator, had a editing tool, and we created stuff like this, right? So how did we get from here to where we are currently? Well, in part, of course, the technology changed and enabled new things, but in part, we brought formal knowledge from other disciplines into design. There are people who already know a lot about typeface, right, from the print world, right, typography. There's people who know a lot about graphic design and layout and on pages, right? The metaphor here is it's kind of like a page, right, that we're used to from the print industry. Photography even, right? So we brought those, that formal knowledge, technical concepts from there. I mean, I'm sure if you're into typography, I mean, even just as a user, we didn't really start talking about fonts until we started using word processors. And you can get into serif and sans serif and all this. It's a technical field, right? So I would argue that with natural language interfaces, that currently, in terms of design, this is where we are, back in 1996. The tools are in the hands of the masses, the platforms, and people are creating stuff. But the design discipline has not yet caught up. It hasn't been created yet. It hasn't matured. And it certainly isn't shared in standards so that you can just hire somebody to do a kind of user experience that you learn to come to expect. So I would argue that to get there, there's a new kind of UX designer, and UX, of course, is user experience, new kind of UX designer. It's still UX design. It's just a different flavor of it around conversation. And what we need to do is we need to bring in something, instead of bringing in formal knowledge from the print industry, we need to bring it from somewhere else. And we need to bring it in from social science, particularly social sciences that deal with human conversation, human communication. And that's what I do, right? So that's what I've been trying to do, and bring in new concepts, new principles, and new patterns. So I'll talk about each of these, and I'm a little worried about time because I always go over. But let me just dive in, and I might go a little fast. So new concepts. First concept, and you can argue whether this is new or not, I would argue it is natural conversation. And it's not the same thing as natural language. If you are in this area, you hear all about natural language processing, natural language understanding, natural language. And we have great tools for analyzing natural language. But when you're building a conversational agent, there's something more. So actually, natural conversation kind of has three main parts to it. There's, of course, the language, right? If you're speaking English or Spanish or Mandarin, the system needs to be able, and the user needs to be able to speak and understand the same language. If it's a conversation, you're talking about something. There's some knowledge component. And there's a lot of sophisticated tools to deal with knowledge graphs, reasoning, all kinds of ontologies for dealing with knowledge, right? It might be in the area of healthcare, travel, entertainment, whatever, education, whatever it is. The third leg of the stool is the interaction piece. And this is, I would argue, kind of the missing piece, right? What is the form of the interaction that your agent is going to engage in? Is it troubleshooting? Right, you get on the phone with somebody, you call them up, say, my phone doesn't work. Well, did you try this? Right? That's an activity. That's got a form to it. It could be a quiz game. Remember Jeopardy, Watson, 2011? The IBM computer could answer all these zillion questions in the form of a quiz game. Now, it couldn't ask questions. It couldn't tell a story. It couldn't quiz you, right? It did that one thing. It did that one activity. But that was a particular kind of interaction. Q&A, that's kind of, it's a different interactional form. Debate is another one. I mean, there's all kinds of interactional forms. This is the leg of the stool that we gloss over. Currently, if you're dealing with a system that has a designer, which means it has a natural language classification for the intents, as they call them, it has entity extraction, and then you have basically a human designer program the responses. If the user says this, then do that, say that. If you have that kind of system, or even if you have a system where you just put it in the algorithms, process it, you need to figure out, currently somebody needs to build that, right? You either need to build it or you need to give the learning system the patterns for it, but it needs to come from somewhere. And currently, I think this is underestimated. We rely, most of the systems that are human designed, we rely on the common sense of the designer, because we all know how to talk, right? We all know how to have a conversation, so we rely on their common sense to take care of that. But the interaction piece is a very technical piece. There's a whole field that focuses on that. And we really need, and plus it's kind of hard. I mean, it's kind of a hard thing, right? What do you do when the user says okay or never mind, right? I mean, designers don't want to worry about this, but they need the machinery to deal with that. So that's what I'm trying to provide, is to provide that, help provide that interactional machinery so that designers can focus on the content and the use case that they want. I would argue there's kind of a couple of main approaches right now to design. And this one, I'm giving it a name. I'm calling it the natural language approach. What you see in that, for example, in chatbots, is natural language, like English or Spanish or Mandarin, is another element in what's otherwise a mobile or a GUI interface, and therefore a mobile or GUI interaction. And the natural language is sort of inserted into that. I mean, take web search, right? That's a GUI page or a mobile page, and it's got natural language in it, but it's still using that. A lot of the mobile apps you see look very much like a mobile app with a natural language component. The interaction is still familiar from those paradigms. On the other hand, there's an emerging discipline of voice-first design. And that's, those are the people designing for the voice-based smart speakers, whether it's an Echo or probably Siri or, or any of the others, realize, of course, we can't just use the interaction that you get from mobile or GUI because there is no mobile or GUI, right? There's nothing to look at, right? So they know that they need to focus on voice from the beginning. And I think this is great. I mean, because if you have a visual interface, you can sidestep some of the hard conversation design problems by falling back on solutions from visual interaction design. But one problem I have with the voice-first approach is that it divides voice from text. I mean, we can have a conversation in voice or through text. We shouldn't divide those. The voice part is not the key. The key, I would argue, is something else. It's whether it's a natural conversation or not. So the conversation-first approach is to design the interaction so that the interaction method is like a natural conversation, like a human conversation, not like a mobile app or a GUI app. And it doesn't matter whether it's through voice or text. The structures of utterances can be the same. That's not the key. The key is the interaction method is like conversation. So I call it conversation first. If you put it, and so as a result, and this is how we design, if you design it in this way, you can use it on a smart speaker. That's me on the end talking to a smart speaker. You can use the same conversation in SMS or on a mobile interface or on a desktop interface. If you design the conversation for conversation first, the interaction with the user works the same way, and then you can gradually enhance that with visuals when or if you have screen real estate. So we're trying to, obviously play on mobile first, but conversation first is in the beginning, it's fully functional through the words alone. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The way you speak is not always how you write.
Yes. Just.
Since you didn't have a mic, would you repeat the question?
The way we speak is not always how we write. Absolutely right. Bear with me. Keep that idea, and we can have a whole conversation about that. But let me show you what I mean by natural conversation. I think you'll get some of what is covered and what's not. Even further than this, with a conversation first approach or natural conversation design, you can also use it on things like avatars and robots, right? Humanoid things, because that's how we talk, right? If you have a system that just answers questions and you put it on a robot and it just answers questions, well, that's not very natural. I mean, if I talk to any of you, you're not just going to answer questions, you're going to do a lot of other stuff too, right? Because so it's a conversation. We're just trying to simulate conversation. It's kind of it's a simple idea, yet it's a technical problem. All right. I'm going to skip over this because I'm a little worried about time. Or I should say I'm going to go a little quicker over this. So some principles for conversational UX design. Natural conversation is efficient. We design it in a way to be efficient. Efficient in a different way from a visual interface. But let me show you. Now I'm actually going to go through the whole thing properly. So recipient design. This is one idea we have from conversation analysis. This is a description of how people design their talk. If I'm talking to one person, I may say, I formulate a message one way. If I'm talking to somebody else, basically saying the same thing, I design it differently, and I design it differently based on what I know about each of them. For example, there's the guy across the street from me. His name's Dave. He's a contractor, and he's remodeling my bathroom, right? I tell that to you. When I talk to my other friend Tom, my other neighbor Tom, I say, Dave's doing my remodel. Why? Because you don't know who Dave is, right? But Tom does, or I believe that Tom does, and I believe that you don't. Now, somebody back might say, oh, yeah, you're one of my neighbors. You know Dave, right? We design, in the case of a person reference, we design it based on our assumptions about what the other person knows, right? So that recipient design is a big concept. That's just one small example, but that we tailor our talk to the recipient. And this is still a hard problem for for AI systems. But that's one way we can do it. The second principle is minimization. So do that. Do number one, but do it with the fewest words necessary. Don't be too wordy. Don't say more than you need to. Because usually in the context of conversation, we're doing stuff in the world. We're trying to get things done. Don't take forever. And so be efficient. However, if there is a problem and the other person doesn't know what you're talking about, you can always fall back on repair. You can redo the utterance, relaxing number two for that moment until you can get the other person to understand, and then continue on with minimization. And really, it's an optimization problem, right? You don't want to use too many words in one utterance, but you don't want to use too many utterances, right? If I use too few words, and you have to keep saying, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that term? And we have more turns. Well, that's not efficient. We want to get that optimal, not too wordy, but also not too many, not too long. But also, we want to get a fewer number of turns. But we can always rely on that. So we do that. We try an efficient utterance first, and we see if it works. And if it doesn't, we know we can fall back on repair mechanisms to recover from that. This is all basic conversation analysis 101. But I bet you most UX designers have never heard of this, right? But if you're going to be building the machinery of conversation, you need to know at least some version of it. Maybe have different words for it. I doubt it. But you need to have some understanding. So that's what I'm trying to bring to this. One example. So from our system, Alma, who we'll talk a lot more about, and you'll get to hear. One example could be, you ask Alma, what's your favorite movie? She says, it says, I guess I like movies with a strong AI lead. You say, what do you mean? It'll say, I like movies in which the main character is an artificial intelligence, right? So this is a simpler version. It presumes that you might be having a problem with either the term lead, using main character instead, that's a little simpler, or maybe you're not sure what AI stands for, so it gives you artificial intelligence, guessing here. But this is the kind of format. In a lot of design, what you see is chatbot designers, they start with this. They start with the long version that everyone, that has all the detail in there, and it takes longer. If you have this mechanism, you can start with the efficient version, then only the people who have trouble can unpackage this longer version. It's an expansion, a sequence expansion. And that way you can speed it up for 90% of the people, and then 10% who have trouble can do a repair. That's one example. All right, that's kind of the fast version of what I usually do. And so I developed a design framework I call the Natural Conversation Framework. Again, natural conversation, that's the target, right? That's the thing we're trying to build. We're not there yet. We've got a ways to go, but that's the target we're trying to get to. It's not just natural language. That's a piece of it. It's natural conversation, the knowledge and the interaction as well. And so I've got a design framework for that, which, so usually what I do is I go through, Alma. All right, let me say something about Alma. So that's just, the design framework is generic. It's platform agnostic. It's a set of principles and patterns that you can apply to any platform. But of course, being at IBM, I currently work with IBM Watson Assistant platform. And so I've implemented the framework on there, and I call that Alma. Alma's the Watson Assistant version, because we can't call everything Watson. Like in IBM, we want to call everything Watson. Everything AI is Watson. So this is Alma, because we're down at Almaden. I'll show you more of Alma. And usually what I do is I go through the framework and kind of through the 4 points. But I want to do something different this time. So I want to show you some stuff I've just been working on currently. It's not done. It's not even.
This is a perfect group.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I usually go through my more normal talk, but I was working on this thing just Friday, and I just want to show it, and we'll see. Maybe that's a bad idea. But I'll show you a demo that I'm working on, and then I will say something about number 3, the pattern language. That's kind of the key to the whole thing. So what I want to show you. So just recently, I've been thinking, can I get Alma to talk to herself? Itself. And so I set up a thing. So I've got one dialogue tree, or sometimes we call it a skill. I like to call it a conversation space. It's a JSON file. I've got one JSON file with a conversation in it. And I've made 2 copies of it. And I've configured them slightly differently. The only difference between them is one's named Alma, one's named Den. They've got different voices connected to the text-to-speech. And in doing this experimentation, I realized they need to have different goals. And so Den has got an agenda, and Alma doesn't. And I've got another video I can show you where Alma has an agenda and Den doesn't. And we can change that up. So that's not important. But in order to drive the conversation forward, somebody needs to bring up some kind of topic. And so these are some things that Alma already does. I didn't know meditation was going to be a theme today, but that's in there. You'll see that. And so I'll show you this in a minute. I want you to think that there's some things I don't want you to worry about or not to look at or not to pay attention to. One is the intonation's off. I'm not focused on that piece. That's the text-to-speech. This is out-of-the-box text-to-speech, Watson text-to-speech. It hasn't been tuned or anything. So the intonation, so often the stress of the correct word in the utterance or the sentence or the phrase is wrong. So it sounds weird, right? So I'm not working on that problem at the moment. It's slow. You'll notice the conversation is really slow. Well, one reason for that is that these systems, most of them on the market, they start processing after the current speaker has stopped and there's been a little pause. That's not how we do it. We are listening while the other person is talking. While you're speaking, I'm analyzing, and I'm predicting where your utterance is going to go. And I can come in exactly at the end with a relevant next utterance. Or sometimes we come in early, right? So that's something that's missing. I think Microsoft has a duplex technology they talked about that solves that. I haven't got my hands on that yet, but that would speed it up. We're analyzing and listening at the same time. This doesn't do that. And most of the standard systems don't. Third thing, the content's not important. Alma is it's a template that has placeholder content. It has enough content in there to demonstrate at least, well, in the pattern language, there's 100 interaction patterns, and there's actually a few. There's some more in Alma. Just enough content to demonstrate those patterns. The pattern is what it's about. I want you to focus on the interaction patterns. That's the piece I'm trying to provide, so that you can, if you're a designer or developer, you take your content. First of all, you set it for your language. You take your content, whatever it is, and you put it into this interaction template, and you get the interaction for free. Okay. So what you're looking at here, we have an app that we developed for our own development. You saw that the text-based chat version in the other slide. This is the voice version. It looks slightly different. What the agent says appears at the top in black, or on the black field, and what it hears is in the bottom on the white field. And what's kind of interesting is, again, this is out of the box speech to text. I haven't tuned it, but often what one says is not what the other one hears, and you'll see that. It can be kind of amusing sometimes. So anyway, I'll just play it. I'll just play it, and then we can talk about it. Now, this is on. Yeah. Okay. So I hope you can hear. We had some sound issues. Ignore this first turn. I actually need to take it out. Just ignore that one.
Hi, how are you? I can't complain. That's good. What do you want? Did you see the game? Well, I only follow chess. What computer beat Kasparov in chess? Deep Blue, a computer created by IBM, beat chess champion Garry Kasparov in 1997.
Placeholder content.
Thank you. You're welcome. How do I meditate? First, sit comfortably and breathe slowly.
Not what she said.
What? First, sit comfortably and breathe slowly. What do you mean by that? Just sit and relax.
Just relax.
Yes. Next, count each breath until you get to 10, then start over. And And finally, continue this for 10 minutes.
Finally, this for 10 minutes. Close.
Thank you. You're welcome. Where are you from?
Shouldn't stress R. Should stress from.
San Jose, California.
California. Close.
Thank you. You're welcome. Is there anything else I can do for you? We're done here.
So
Have a nice day. You take care. Goodbye. Goodbye.
So that's Alma and Den. Yeah, so it's been very interesting. So in doing this, initially I just set this up, kind of had the two things talk to each other, not really that seriously, but what I realized quickly was that a lot of the conversation patterns that Alma had were one way. She could ask a question, or she could answer a question, but she couldn't ask that question. If I can answer a question, I should be able to ask that too. She could tell a story, but she couldn't listen to a story. She could, I realized that a lot of these things were one way. And so by doing this, I set them going to with each other, and I see, there's a gap there. I don't have that capability. So I'm building out to make all these actions two ways. So that the conversation patterns, again, this is supposed to be a reusable template for designers. It'll be more versatile. It can work in either direction, because I don't know what kind of use case you're going to have and what you're going to need. So some things I want to point out about this conversation, or that demo, is that it demonstrates a lot of things about the structure of natural conversation. Natural conversations, they have some kind of opening to the interaction. They're not always the same, and Alma can do it in different ways, but they generally involve hi's and how are yous. Sometimes it's the ringing of a telephone. There's an opening to it. So we have an opening module for taking care of that. Somebody has to get to a first activity or a first topic. It could be a request, like what do you want, how can I help you? Or sometimes the speaker just initiates it. Say the caller or the speaker, the person who approached the other person, they just come up with their first topic. But somehow you have to get to first topic or first activity. You then have to do that activity. And it could be different kinds of activity, right? It could be answering questions. It could be asking questions. It could be telling story. It could be doing a quiz. It could be all kinds of things. I'll show you the ones that Alma can do. But you've got to do that activity and then potentially transition to a next activity. How do you handle that transition to the next activity? Well, things like, okay, thanks, they close down that sequence and they can move on to the next one. Okay, and thanks is very different from what do you mean? What do you mean means we're still on that last activity. There's some trouble. Ultimately, then you start to move to close. You check for any last activity, anything else. If not, then you close, have some kind of closing. So these are the parts of a natural conversation that need to be in a design system for a conversational agent. This is a critical part of how we do conversation. Again, I don't hear any designers talking about these phases and what their solutions are. I don't know, and I don't see any standard solutions for openings and closings, for topic transition, and for other things that we'll talk about too. One thing I want to show. So this is Den's side of the conversation, which you just heard, and you saw that it was not always so accurate in what it heard. So another part of managing the conversation is like I've been talking about, repair, right? You need to have ways to initiate repair on either. So there's a few techniques for getting a repeat or a paraphrase of part of or all of what the other person said, right? What did you say? Unless it's a repeat of the whole thing. Or I might say the what, like she might have said, how do I what? Right? It could be just for a particular word. Or what do you mean by that? Or what do you mean by meditate? Or right, there's a whole set, and this comes out of conversation analysts document this, of repair practices. And this is critical because after any turn, in the conversation, one party might not be able to hear or might not understand or might not know a key term. So this is part of the framework. And it's based on a underlying model of expandable sequences. Again, this is from conversational analysis. You have sequences that they can have a compact form, or they can be expanded as needed. And they can be expanded to deal with these different kinds of conversation management issues, one of which is repair. So here we see this particular utterance. This particular utterance is actually, first, sit comfortably and breathe slowly. That utterance has got some issues. And so we've got two expansions of that sequence to deal with it to repair the trouble, and then you go back. Anyway, expandable sequences. Again, that should be a basic concept. OK. I probably very close to out of time, but let me just say, let me just bear with me. OK. I'll skip Alexander. So in the framework, there's a pattern language. Currently has 100 generic interaction patterns. That's not all of them. There's more. But that's a set that we developed over the last couple of years that are pretty useful. And we're adding more. It has 3 parts, which you should now be a little bit familiar. It's the conversational activity itself. Are we asking questions, doing inquiries, complicated requests, telling a story? This is storytelling or instruction giving, like the meditation, quizzing, inquiries, the other direction. And then there's conversation management. So at the sequence level, things like repairs, closing the sequence, thank you, or OK, or aborting it, never mind, and opening, closing the conversation, right? So there's all this stuff. These 2 categories here, B and C, are all about talk that's about managing the other talk, right? The meat of the conversation is A. But all these other things have to be in place to manage that interaction. It's interactional structure. And so that's in the book, Conversational UX Design, A Practitioner's Guide to the Natural Conversation Framework. I wrote with Rafael Arar, who's a UX designer and artist. Say more about that. Overview of the patterns. And I'm going to skip through that. I'm going to skip through the quiz module and just say, so finally, learning. I do have actually an example in the book from learning. And the idea is that you have, I can't. So you have those patterns. And the idea is that's an interaction pattern. You can put it, whatever kind of content you want in it, and use it for all kinds of different use cases. And they are combinable. So one thing you can do is you can combine the extended telling module with the quiz module and get a tutoring kind of situation. Or even a little more complex, you could do extended telling, inquiry. So extended telling, this is sometimes called storytelling or instruction giving, but it's basically you have a bunch of parts of a thing that it's like a monologue, right? You could do a monologue. You could also have some, next module, question and answer from the student, and then finally a quiz of the student. Here I've got a simpler version. It's just those 2. You put those 2 together, and this is the abstraction of the patterns, and I don't have time to go through each of them, except to say that the telling part has 4 parts to it. And it can have however many parts you want. I can show you another video of Alma telling Dan Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. It's about 30 parts, right? It doesn't, whatever many you want. But it's got multiple parts. And I'll show you an example how they work. And then here you can answer a series of questions. Anyway, right, let me show you an example. So this is a mock-up. It's not, I haven't built this. It'd be easy to build. But you might have something like, teach me something about human speech. So some entry into this initiation of this topic. OK, first, and so the A is the agent. U is the student for the tutor. First, one of the most distinctive features of human voice is its pitch. So that's the first part. At line 3 is the first part. Now, at line 4, the student can do several things. One is they can do nothing. If they do nothing, after a pause, the agent will go on and give the next part. They can say, OK, we call those continuers, yes. And it'll continue on to the next part. But the student might also say, what do you mean by that? Or say that again. Or what do you mean by pitch? Right? They might do a repair and expand that out to deal with troubles in understanding, and then say, OK, and you go on, right? This is critical. This is interactive storytelling. Because you don't want to get to the very end and then find out that the student didn't understand something in the very first turn, right? We can't do that. It has to be interactive. You have to be able to go through a part at a time. Now, this is a little clunky based on what we can do as humans, because I can interrupt. If you're telling a story, I can interrupt you at any point. We're not quite there, but this is the pattern we're trying to get to. We're breaking into chunks, and at each point, the student or the user, and this applies to anything, it doesn't have to be a student, anything, either gives a signal to continue, or what are you talking about? Say that again. What do you mean? So we have that to give some content, and this happens to be on human pitch, how it works with the vocal cords, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you plug in the quiz module, then it'd be, OK, well, would you like to take a quiz? Sure. Well, what do we call our perception of the highness or lowness of a human voice? Then the user has to give an answer, right? They can get it right, say pitch. Agent will say correct. They can get it wrong. Down here, the question, answer, they say frequency, incorrect. Try again. They could say give up. Then Alma will give the right answer. In this case, the user corrects and gets fundamental frequency. Anyway, this is basic interaction patterns. Right? We use this for all kinds of. We use this for joke telling, right? Why can't you trust atoms? The punchline is they make up everything. You either get it right, you get it wrong, or you give up, right? It's a generic pattern. You can be through all kinds of stuff. So anyways, that's my message. I got these. My approach is pattern-based design. You have these generic interaction patterns, and then you provide the use case, and you provide the knowledge, and you just have to put it in. You don't have to figure out what to do with all the uh-huhs and the okays and the thanks and what do you mean, all that. That's my job, or the interaction designer's job. And with that, I think I'm done. I've got a copy of the book if you want to come up and flip through it, and I'll stop there.